Hi, everyone. I'm Rusty Greiff, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at JFF. I'm incredibly excited for this conversation today. As part of Horizons, we've asked innovators and big thinkers and doers in our sector to come together to discuss, maybe even actually debate big ideas that are driving some of the most important issues in our sector, with a particular focus around racial equity, access, and impact. Today, we have three extraordinary agents of change. Some are dear friends of mine and people that I've been fortunate enough to work with. And we're gonna drive an unusual discussion, and they've had great success around impact, really at scale. I think all three have really worked in really scalable ways around this impact area. First is Peter Cohen, president of University of Phoenix. Great to see you, Peter, and thanks for being here. Second is a new person in my life, Janice Burns, Chief Career Officer at Degreed and the former Chief Learning Officer at MasterCard. And a colleague and friend, David Sutphen, Chief Strategy and Engagement Officer at 2U, the parent company of Get Smarter and Trilogy as well. All right, so here's the prompt that we asked the three of them to spend some time on. We've asked them to engage in a conversation on the new lifelong learning marketplace that is really exploding, an area where universities and institutions, edtech solution providers are converging, collaborating, and actually in some cases competing with corporations and employers to drive skilling and reskilling experiences around the continuum for learners and workers, with a particular focus around racial equity and access. I think everyone is pretty well up to date on this, but there's some jarring framing. Over 85 million workers in America are still desperately in need of skilling and reskilling. 64 million of those do not have post-secondary degrees. We're also seeing needs on the market side where over 80% of corporate executives, even small business owners, are recognizing that their employees do not have the skills now and especially in the future. Add that with systemic challenges and obstacles where we're seeing, especially re-entering employees and workers and learners post-COVID, where they've been dramatically affected with women, Latinx and Black workers and learners have been particularly affected, dealing with issues around lack of professional social mobility and capital, looking at real serious issues around organizational segregation and biases in the workplace. It's creating massive supply and demand disconnect and challenges, but it's also opening up a marketplace where we're connecting new dots and new providers across learning and work. So before we go to a live discussion with all three of them, we actually asked all three to spend a couple of minutes each with a big idea. Where they see opportunities for change, opportunities for impact, especially in leveraging their assets and resources that are substantial. So let's check out what Peter, Janice, and David had to say.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janice Burns, Chief Career Experience Officer at Degreed. Here's my prompt. An evolving lifelong learning marketplace is taking shape where corporations and universities are converging, collaborating, and at times competing to deliver new solutions for workers and learners of all ages. What's the big idea contributing to your role in the marketplace focused on equity, access, and impact? Okay, the big idea for both me and Degreed is what I call inclusive learning. I define inclusive learning with 6 A's. I'll quickly go through them right now and talk more about them when we're all together. 1, access. Access to meaningful learning that truly matters. Number 2, adaptability. Adaptable learning approaches that ensure that no matter how you learn or where you want to learn, that learning approach works for you. Number 3, agency. Providing people with agency over their own learning by ensuring that you help them build a diverse skills portfolio that they can apply in different situations and different types of work. Affiliation, creating the conditions where people can learn through and with each other. Number 5, amplifying. Amplifying our power skills by focusing on inclusive skills. And number 6, accountability. At the end of the day, we all have to be held accountable for delivering results. And so the stakeholders involved in the learning and education game, governments, universities, corporations, ed tech companies, all need to ensure that what they help to educate people on, the learning that they provide, they need to be accountable for ensuring it delivers results. We can talk more tomorrow. Goodbye.
Thanks, Rusty and Maria, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I guess what excites me the most and the biggest idea that I see to you helping bring to this conversation is the fact that we now have 45 nonprofit university partners in the United States, public and private institutions spread across 26 states and the District of Columbia that are really delivering, I would argue for the first time ever, like a full national scale workforce retraining infrastructure. And what's great about that is, because of the data architecture and the insights that come from that national network, we're able to inform what the curriculum is and at the same time engage employers at the national level who can come recruit out of these boot camps across these amazing university partners, talent in lots of different disciplines. And I think the combination of scale, relevance of curriculum, and connection to employers is really critical to unlocking the equity and opportunity and access, I think, challenge that we've faced as a country. I think it's one of the reasons why, we've recently been chosen as a official training partner of 110, and excited to say that we're also working closely with Revolution and Steve Case's Rise of the Rest to help identify talent for their portfolio companies all around the country. And the other thing that I think that nationwide network enables us to do is to bring local workforce boards all around the country to the table to think about innovative and creative public-private partnerships to help solve some of the local workforce challenges that are happening around the country.
Hi, my name is Peter Cohen, president of University of Phoenix. Over the past year, the world has changed incredibly with work from home. There's been a shift probably 10 years forward of how people learn and how they train at work. And the demographics of the world have changed as well. There are fewer 18 to 24-year-olds coming into the marketplace, and there are fewer immigrants supporting our adult working needs. But the needs of business haven't changed. They're looking for well-qualified workers who have both digital and technology skills as well as human factor skills. Our university serves a very diverse population, with the majority of our students being people of color. The big idea we've had is to support our students and our 1 million alumni for life, not just while they're in school, recognizing that they will need to continually reskill and upskill for the life of their career and for the multiple careers that they have. So we're creating skills dashboards that are written in the language of business, mentor networks to help them learn more about different types of jobs, social networks in order to help them get those jobs, guidance and guidance counseling to make sure that they can identify what jobs they may be interested in, skills assessments for that same purpose, and relationships with companies that are looking for a more diverse, well-qualified talent pool. That is our Career Services for Life commitment.
Thanks, everyone. Peter, Janice, and David. So those are three actually really big ideas. And I appreciate that on all levels, you guys are really attacking and thinking about the marketplace in not just high impact ways, but really scalable ways. And I love that there's some themes that were coming through the three of you, but there's really distinct opportunities. And I want to unpack that a little bit more. David, I'd love to start with you. So one of the things that's interesting is, 2U has some really interesting assets and resources, and the ability to work with, as you said, public and private four-year schools, but also looking at the world of credentials through Get Smarter and short courses, and then boot camps through Trilogy and other parts of your platform, if you will. One of the things I'd love to just get more thoughts on is this idea of this career continuum that you guys have built over the last couple of years and how that plays across this national network. You talked about data, and I thought that was a really interesting point. It's very relevant to, I think, what Janice and Degreed have built in their own marketplace. But I'd love to just get more insights from you on how you see data playing in its relationship to content and curriculum, and its relationship to also how that can be better aligned around pathways for different learners and workers. Love more thoughts on that.
Thanks again, Rusty. Sorry, I was muted. Thanks for inviting me to the conversation.
Sure.
I guess what I would say is, what I think is interesting about where 2U sits right now is, when you think about the combination of our short courses, boot camps, and degree programs, as online education becomes more of the norm, I think data is really important on the front end, which is, what do people need to learn, right? And, to Janice's point, you want to make sure that there's value to what people are learning. And the way you do that is to better understand what's in demand. So I think that's one big part of it on the front end. But I think in some respects, what Peter was saying a little bit about their lifetime, kind of career services, we feel the same way, because at the end of the day, if people are going to be lifelong learners, then they need to understand at each stage and phase in their career, what is the thing that they need at that moment that's going to return the greatest value to them. And so in the context of our bootcamp business, there have been some pretty successful regional workforce reskilling efforts, but what we're hearing from folks is, at these workforce boards around the country, is there's never really been a national network. And so if you think about the 25 plus states that we're in and the 45 universities, there's literally tens of thousands of people in boot camps where we can see what's going on in the classroom every day, see where, and then what we say to employers, this year, I think we will do close to 30,000 free employer referrals. And we say to employers, your feedback is our currency. So if we send you somebody out of our boot camps and you decide not to interview them, tell us why. Is something wrong with their resume? Is something wrong with their hard skills or the soft skills? And all of that feedback comes back into, our network, and then we can distill insights out of that. And so I guess the last thing I'd say on that point is, just last month or a month and a half ago, we put out a UX UI workforce report that was a result of a bunch of inputs from employers. And it's the kind of thing that would not only be valuable to somebody who's thinking about potentially enrolling in a boot camp, but also to employers to say, hey, what's trending in this industry in terms of the skills and the needs. And I think that we're working, the fact that we've had 6,000 employers hire over boot camps, and have all these different universities, really adds value to that data set.
That's interesting. Thanks, David. Janice, I'm going to go to you. And one thing I just want to piggyback on something that David just talked about, which is this theme of feedback is your currency, and the power of insights. Before we talk about your big idea around inclusive learning, just because I candidly geek out over Degreed and what has been built, can you just talk a little bit more about this upskilling platform and Degreed, what you guys do? Because in its own right, you've built your own capabilities around a marketplace. You've looked at learning in the most holistic of ways, and it's not been limited and constricted by traditional lanes or conventional lanes of learning. And I'd love just additional context if you could just share kind of the vision behind Degree and what you guys have built now.
All right, I'm unmuted now.
You're great.
The vision behind Degree is really to make skills the currency of work instead of traditional credentials like degrees. And we do that by trying to create the most intelligent upskilling platform that takes you along the entire skill enablement journey. And so we define that skill enablement journey as starting with development. And most companies, and even I would say universities, have only gotten to stage one, which is helping people acquire knowledge that they can assess. But if you're really going from knowledge to skills, then stage two is about activating skills activation, and having experiential learning where people can practice the skill, where they can fail at the skill and recover and get feedback on that skill. Stage three is mobility, being able to transact on that skill so that you can find new opportunities, and that organizations can deploy people to different types of work based on need, based on the skills and the skill portfolio they have. And stage four is really around leveraging data and insights to generate intelligence. And that intelligence should help an organization realize value. And we talk about value as three-dimensional value. Financial value, meaning if you think about your skill portfolio as any other asset on your balance sheet, then you should be able to calculate whether or not those skill assets are appreciating or depreciating in value, and be able to adjust that portfolio so that you maintain market value. We talk about productivity value, and the productivity value is really around extending the life of an employee so that they're with you longer and performing at a higher rate longer. And then durability value is around making each employee kind of a force multiplier, so that they have enough skills to be able to do more than one job. And so our role in the marketplace is to create a holistic skills intelligence platform that helps you move throughout that journey, and we meet you wherever you are.
That's pretty powerful. And you just, if I can connect the dots a little bit, and Peter, bring you in on also like some of the work, Peter, that you've done as leader at University of Phoenix. I mean, I would argue you're really reimagining the value proposition of a university degree and extending that platform into something that's obviously for a lifetime. That's a really profound difference. You know, Janice talks about, which I think is interesting, around productivity value and market value and the durability of that. I'm just curious on your own vision, the transition that got you to looking at career services for life, and what was the motivating factors. And I also would love, if you don't mind, in that context, I think it's helpful for all of us to better understand the profile of the University of Phoenix student and learner and worker. There's really interesting data, as you and I have talked about, of who experiences University of Phoenix and graduates and moves on. I think it's a powerful example of how we look at equity and access and driving that. So I love connecting the dots on that.
Sure.
There's a lot of dots to connect based on what both Janice and David said here
That's
about
good.
both skills as well as the feedback loops of data, both of which we have a large supply of. But let me talk very briefly about our student profile. Our student profile is one that was actually quite negatively impacted by the pandemic. So if you were to describe our average student, if you will, it's a working mom of color with a couple of kids that they're taking care of, who spent the last year homeschooling their kids. And so when you just think about the dynamics of everything I just said, 60% of our students are first generation college students. So when you talk about that, you know, the agency and the affiliation that they might have both over learning from their prior experience in K-12, which typically they were not afforded the same quality of schools that more privileged people were able to afford. And when you think about their work connections and their social mobility connections, many of them don't have role models because their parents weren't in large corporations. They weren't part of networks where going to a college was a traditional part of their background and upbringing. Many of our students also have zero expected family contribution to their university education, meaning they are obviously of lower income from a family dynamic standpoint. So these are students in general, these are adults, the average age is about 37, who have not been treated well by America so far in terms of the education access that they had to get where they are. So when we think about how you support them throughout their journey, in the initial part of their journey, trying to help them figure out, this goes to our career services for life concept, figure out what kinds of roles are out there, because they only know the roles that their parents or their friends or people in their community might have talked to them about. So being able to provide assessments that say, let's find out what your interests are, let's find out what your capabilities are, and then by the way, here's a whole range of jobs, and here's the earnings power of those jobs. And then here's what you need to be able to do, the skills as Janice talked about, and the knowledge I think that David talked about, that you have to have in order to get one of those jobs. And here's where they are in your community. So that's kind of step one in terms of, you know, how you think about supporting this type of student. Step two is actually gaining the credential that you need, and we'll talk about credentials more later. But in order to gain that credential, working mom, with kids, you know, trying to squeeze this into a life where their family comes first, their current job comes second, their community comes third, and going back to school to further their education in order to better themselves comes fourth. So if you think about, we're in fourth place with them, and they have these very full, busy, active lives, providing the supports that are both social, emotional, academic, financial, as well as motivational. You have to provide all those. And we provide all of those in an online environment. So we went online in 1989, just before AOL was formed. So we go back a long ways in having a comfort and knowledge about how to provide not just the academics online, but really provide those support networks that allow people to stay online. And what we recognized at the end of this, Rusty, was that just graduating was really the beginning step in their journey. And what they really needed was ongoing skills, as Janice talked about, but also this mentoring network, this alumni network, and building up their own social capital so they could get their first job, understand how to get promoted in that job, understand how to advance their career, and potentially leave their current employer and go to another employer. All those career coaching and career counseling skills are part of what we recognized as a career-oriented adult student university we needed to provide. That giving them just a degree was really just the first part of their battle in life to improve their careers. So we recognized that we're responsible for providing them with those additional supports throughout the life of their career. And we've begun to flesh out all the things that I just talked about so that we can do that throughout the life of their career and the multiple careers they're likely to have, as people today typically have about 5 careers over their 40-year span of being in the workplace.
And Peter, I loved what you said in this whole model for the University of Phoenix because it really demonstrates an inclusive learning strategy in action. You know, a lot of times when people talk about inclusion, they just focus on the people that they want to include, or they focus on access, and they don't think about this learning experience holistically, especially around how do you build agency with the learner so that they can take charge of their learning and skill building throughout their life so that they have career elasticity, or even how you can create those affiliations, because those affiliations are critically important to providing lifelong support. It's not just the academics, it's the people that give you that social and emotional and motivational support. And, you know, what you described is very heartwarming. And I just think it's an excellent example of thinking very inclusively about the learning process.
Thanks, Janice. As you think about how you got your last job, you know, quite likely, and Rusty and I have known each other now for 20 years, crisscrossing across various companies. And David, your boss, Chip and Possack, and I worked together, you know, 20 years ago as well.
Totally.
It's very much more about who you know than it is about what you know. And the what you know is potentially a foot in the door when we'll talk about why degrees are still valuable, but who you know is really important. So building out that social network, whether it's an alumni network or helping you build your community network of friends, people you know in the community from various social responsibilities that you have, that really becomes most of how you get your jobs as you progress in your career, to your point. And so we want to make sure that people understand that and leverage those networks and build out their own.
Excellent.
You know, can I just piggyback on that, just talking about issues around social capital and social mobility that Peter, you and Janice were highlighting. You know, one of the things that's interesting that Degree talks about, which is fundamentally one of the missions, is that, you know, we are not defined by our paper, right? Being the degree, let's say. And I'm saying this to the president of the University of Phoenix, and you know, working within the system where David works closely, obviously, with four-year institutions, both public and private. And so, you know, in the context, again, of looking at this diversified marketplace, where I think we all recognize that we have this vision of real-time learning and skill experiences based on the needs of that learner and worker at that moment. I am curious, just for the group, just, you know, their thoughts on the value and the currency of maybe, yes, the degree, but just in general, looking at the world of credentials and certificates and how we should think about that. Anyone jump in that's brave enough to do so?
Well, you know, I have a point of view.
Bring it, Janice.
I have a point of view that, yes, today, degrees, university degrees are valued. But more and more, as we look at the shortage of talent, both today and especially tomorrow, companies are beginning to understand that if they only hire people who have degrees, they will never meet the talent needs to execute on their business strategy. And so we also are finding, and this comes from my corporate life, that college oftentimes only gives you knowledge. You don't actually graduate with skills that you can apply in many cases, because that apprenticeship component of the college degree isn't always there. You know, it surprises me. My husband is a physician, and if you think about doctors and even lawyers, when they go through their educational process, only a small portion of it is actually academics. The rest of it is them practicing on other people. And in medicine, they say, learn one, show one, do one, teach one. And so you're spending a lot of your time practicing on real people at very high stakes and learning from your mistakes. But college doesn't necessarily teach you in that way. And so what we're finding is companies are looking for people who have the skills and experience when they're hiring. And even if you have a college degree, if you don't have the skills and experience with that college degree, you may not be able to qualify for a job. So we're seeing more companies look at credentials as a way of determining if someone actually has the experience, has the skills to perform the job today, and if they have the learning agility to be able to apply those skills in different situations. So obviously, I am never going to poo-poo a college education. I have one, and my children had no choice but to get a college education. But at the same time, I am very aware that many people will never be able to afford that, will never have the time for that, but they do have the time to spend 6, 8, 12 weeks, 6 months getting a certification that really matters. And I think JFF actually partners with organizations like Merit America, who help to upskill people who do not have BAs, will never have BAs, but have the ability to contribute value in the workplace.
Yeah.
David,
Go on, Peter.
No.
Oh, I guess I was struck, Janice, because, you know, a lot of people, I don't know this about you, but 50% of the degree programs that we collaborate with our university partners on Empower are in you know, healthcare disciplines. And to your point about in almost every single one of those, students have to spend more time in their clinical placements than they do physically in the classroom to, I think, reinforce the point that you made. And so I think in those disciplines, the notion that degrees are going to become less relevant is just, I think, not the fact, because in a lot of those places you actually have to get licensure and you have. So I often feel like the debate about degrees versus non-degrees needs to acknowledge that there's a huge segment of the population that goes into healthcare. You know, Black women disproportionately represented in healthcare disciplines. You know, so if they do want to move up in their careers, they probably are going to have to get a master's degree. But in other areas, you know, I think what's interesting is the interplay between companies realizing that they need to think about more skills-based hiring, but then also doing things like, you know, what Guild's doing with our partnership, where they realize once somebody's come in, you know, or 110 and they don't have a degree, is there a path that we can create for them? You know, and I also look at something like, you know, we recently announced a partnership with you know, Morehouse College for a degree completion program. I mean, you know, of the 35+ million Americans who've stopped out in the United States from college, like over 3 million of those are Black men. And most of the wealth gap in the Black community right now relative to earning potential compared to the, you know, broader society is coming from Black men and not Black women. And so, like, I would argue that for Black men, you know, getting a college degree, especially if you've already started and you could go back and you can do it. Interestingly, our Morehouse program is going to be priced for the degree completion offering at almost 50% of what the cost of what the traditional 18 to 24 residential campus program is. So I guess what I yearn for in this debate, both from a policymaking perspective and you know, these kind of conversations, is the ability to kind of talk about the nuances of the facets of the marketplace. And there's opportunity for all of these models to work. And there's a need for all of these models to work. And I think what frustrates me the most as somebody who spent, you know, a significant chunk of the beginning of my career as, you know, chief of staff to Harold Ford and then for Senator Kennedy, is it feels to me like the policy debate is way behind where the reality of the market is. And there's a need for a much more sophisticated understanding of how do you foster the things that can help solve these problems, and like who can add value, and how do we create the right incentive structure for all the players that are in the market, whether they're private sector players, public sector players, or nonprofits?
David, I couldn't agree with you more. It's never been an either or, degreed or credentials. One of the things we've done with our career services program is to move well beyond degrees and offer certificates and badges and micro credentials, because you don't necessarily need that next degree. But degrees have been used by corporations as a sorting mechanism. Somebody did something for 4 years, and therefore you feel confident giving them that entry-level job. But the degree is typically just the starting point. And, there's a lot of incorrect thinking about the cost of a degree. So the average American today who has a degree, of which only 31% of adults actually have a bachelor's degree or higher, so the majority don't, but the average debt that those people incur is less than the cost of a new car. The average wage disparity between a high school graduate and somebody who has a bachelor's degree is approximately $20,000 a year. So the ROI on the cost of the degree in terms of actual cost for most people in debt is a 2-year payback. So when you think about the degree lasting you for, maybe a generation or so, the idea that you can pay it back in 2 years is a pretty good return on investment. But it's not the only thing you need to do in order to get a job. Janice, you were talking, of course, about the fact that you gain knowledge in many places with a degree, but not necessarily skills. And one of the things, as a practitioner-driven university, we use the learn, practice, apply method, which sounds very similar to what your husband went through to get his physician's program degree, which is that you learn something, then you practice it, and then you demonstrate and apply it, which is why we use practitioner faculty who are actually working in their field and can bring relevant day-to-day information while you're still going to school and earning that degree. But I couldn't agree more that degrees are just part of the solution, and there is no one solution for the wide range of people that we have in society, with the wide range of opportunities and opportunities they've had prior to this in order to potentially get a great job or not get a great job, or get to attend a great school or not attend a great school. That the challenges that we face start they start in kindergarten and probably even in preschool, with the difference between where someone has a zip code and what school they get to go to, and how well that prepares them to be on a successful track for life or not. And there's a lot of things we need to do as policymakers, regulators, accreditors, and citizens in order to change that trajectory, especially for those who didn't start out with a privileged background.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. There's no one size fits all. What I do know, though, is as you look at technology jobs, those jobs in the digital space, many of those jobs, when you look at the real requirements to do those jobs, do not require a degree. So
Great.
much so that at MasterCard and at many of the IT companies, they took and we took the degree requirement off of the job description because it's not necessary. If we're really talking about equity, you only want to require those things that are absolutely necessary. Some of our best technologists were people who never had a degree, who came from alternative certification programs. And then I think about populations like people who are re-entering society, where degrees really may be very much out of range for them, but teaching them a skill, a high demand skill that they can use and apply so that they can re-enter society and actually gain some economic status, which is very difficult for that population, is important. So again, thinking about inclusion from a learning perspective, you have to offer different approaches. That was one of my A's. And one approach is a degree, one approach is certification, one approach is experience, but unfortunately, experience without proof of actual proficiency in a skill is going to be difficult for you to trade on. And that's where the credentials and certifications help you to navigate kind of the career marketplace.
It's interesting, Janice, you mentioned that because, some of the feedback that we get, from employers in particularly the boot camp business is that it is more important in the context of an interview for folks to show like the approach that they took to solving the problem and their softer skills than it is to demonstrate, that the code itself was accurate. Because I think, to your point, and we've done some research recently with Gallup, so I get to spend a lot of time with Stephanie Markin, who I'm sure you all know as well. And one of the things she said to me, which I just thought was really insightful, which we'd expect from somebody from Gallup, she said, everybody talks about lifelong learning, but we don't talk enough about like, what does it actually take to be a lifelong learner, right? And it takes a capacity to appreciate and embrace and have the agency to know that you can learn something new and you can master it, right? Because that's the thing that is going to empower you if you're going to have to continue to learn new things. And so, the reason why I raise that is because the other thing that troubles me a bit is there's, it feels like so often the metrics that we use to define success are, what is somebody's salary 6 months or 12 months out? And don't get me wrong. I think obviously you want there to be a financial reward and benefit, in terms of people's, but we need to be looking at those things more holistically. Because at the end of the day, it's not just the first job that you're going to get, it's whether that credential or that skill development sets you onto a path so that you can get the job after that and the job after that. And so, none of these are easy things to solve for, but it feels to me like, we need to be thinking more holistically about how we measure, which is why, what Peter was saying, in terms of them doing lifelong career services is, I guess we're kind of following in their footsteps in some ways with our career engagement network and doing the same thing. Because, if we're hosting workshops 2 times a week for people who are in our data science boot camps, well, if you're in a short course that's a data science, or you're in a degree program in data science, why can't you benefit from that same, career insight from, employers who are hiring folks? So I think, we're all kind of swimming in the same direction, and we need everybody swimming in the same direction, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's critical for us to do is to teach people how to really package their skills and experience and understand the difference between the different types of skills that we use and leverage and are required. So I like to think about skills in 3 big categories. One are those power skills, which are the human skills or professional skills, and those are durable skills that you can use and transfer in almost any job. And those skills are going to follow you throughout your career lifetime. And then I think about functional/technical skills that require some level of subject matter expertise, but are much more situational. They are transferable if the right situation and the right conditions exist, but their lifespan isn't quite as long. And then I think about hot skills, which are much more transactional. They're in demand today. Their shelf life is much shorter, and you're going to have to continue to upskill and reskill in those areas. But the market price for those skills are probably a lot higher. People need to have a portfolio that consists of all 3 skills and understand how to balance that. And they also need to understand if they are overloaded in an area of skill that has either limited market value or has limited ability to transfer to other types of roles, jobs, work, they're going to get stuck in their career. And so this whole issue of lifelong learning, or what I call career elasticity, is critically important for us who are educating and upskilling individuals to help them think very differently about their skills. And it's not always about just learning a new skill. Sometimes it's about taking an old skill and learning how to apply that skill differently.
So Janice, so I hate that I have to stop this conversation, because I think we could all do this for a long time. But unfortunately, we only have a minute or so left. I started you guys off with a big idea. I'm gonna shamelessly ask for a quick hot take at the end, and that's unfair of me, but we're up against time. There's a lot of real important themes that were discussed. I'd love to just get quickly one or two hits from each of you on what do you think has to change in behavior across stakeholders for this marketplace, either at the corporate level, at the institutional university level, at the learner or worker level. Just trying to understand, how do we find those levels of incentives and alignments to work, but that also requires us to maybe change how we do that. So who wants to jump in the final 30 to 60 seconds?
I'll just say one.
Go. You go.
Go ahead, David.
No, you go. You go.
just one thing quickly. Look, I think the pockets of the future are already here. You've heard about them today. So the future is going to happen. But the key issue that we started off talking about was, how do you get equity and access for all? And I think that is the critical challenge facing America today. And unfortunately, it requires two things that seem to be in short supply. One is an open mind to the fact that there are many people who have differences from you and have similarities to who you are, and that you need to embrace that. And the second is open hearts, which means you have to be willing to accept the differences that people have. And those two things are the two hardest things for us to do. The rest of it is solving itself. We can solve the regulatory issues, the accrediting issues, the funding issues, the learning issues. We can solve all that. The human factor issue that Janice talked about that will carry you for life, that's the one that I struggle to figure out how we solve.
Yeah, I guess I'd pick up on what Peter's saying. Maybe it's a slightly different take on that same thing, which is like, I have found during the course of my career that the kind of lost in translation challenges of working across different facets of civil society, private industry, and government kind of get in the way because of preconceived notions that people bring to the table about. My view is that all of us are driven by incentive structures, but there is a way to create a mechanism if we can all agree on what Peter just aligned around, which is the vision of where we're trying to go, where you can align those incentive structures where everybody is rowing in the same direction, and that we are leveraging all of the knowledge and capabilities that we have toward an aligned outcome. And I feel like that doesn't happen as often as it could or should. And so my hope is that we can, spend more time figuring that out as well.
Janice, you want the last word?
I just ditto what everyone else said. I think we're all in this game together, trying to create more equity and accessibility and inclusion. And it's going to take all of the stakeholders to work together to make that happen.
Thank you, Janice, Peter, and David, for opening my mind over the last 45 minutes. It's been an extraordinary conversation around, frankly, the complexities of building this marketplace and how we, in fact, do leverage stakeholders to find an alignment, to find incentives, and push the agenda around equity, access, and impact I love this conversation. We could talk so much longer, but thank you for your expertise and for the collaboration, the conversation. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.